friends. Welcome to the Skinny on Wall Street with us, the Wall Street Skinny. I'm Kristen.
I'm Jen.
And today we have a bunch of stuff we want to get into. So Jen has been anxiously on the edge of her seat waiting for CPI numbers to come out, and they were not exactly as exciting. Yeah. So she'll quickly get into that. A couple of interesting deals that are going on, or I should say deal and a possible almost anti-deal. But Mars announced that they were going to acquire Kellanova, the maker of Cheez-Its and Pringles, for $35.9 billion in an all-cash deal. And so some of the stuff that's actually really interesting about this is first of all, who the hell is Kellanova? So there's some kind of fun shenanigans that went on. Where did they come from? They're this massive company. The TLDR is it was from a spin-off transaction. I'm going to get a little bit into what those are. And then we're going to talk about the fact that this was an all-cash deal because there's some interesting things there. There's also the news recently about Google potentially having to get broken up. And so we're not going to get into a huge deep dive on that, but there's some interesting tidbits we can take away from what happened with Microsoft back in the 2000s. So we're going to touch on that a little bit. But before we get into any of this, we really wanted to discuss this Wall Street Journal article that came out that was focused on the death of a number of just young men who worked in finance over the last year and the culture of the hours that people are putting in and the fact that some of this stuff needs to change. So,
yeah,
I mean, it was a really kind of horrible story and just a horrible set of circumstances.
Yeah.
I don't know,
So
Jen, if you can.
earlier this summer, there were two tragic deaths that were pretty widely reported in the news and amongst kind of the Fin memers on social media. The first was the death of 35-year-old former Green Beret turned Bank of America Financial Institutions Group, or FIG, investment banking associate. His name was Leo Lucanus III. So he passed away on May 2nd after working reportedly several all-nighters in a row and actually working 100-plus hour weeks for close to a month. And then 2 weeks later, Adnan Dumik, or Dumich, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, I apologize. He was a 25-year-old UK-based trader who was also working at Bank of America. He died while playing soccer at a client event. And we, Kristen and I, have no actual knowledge of what led to their deaths. And without knowing either of these guys, just reading about Leo Lucanus, he was a badass, okay? He was a literal American hero who served in the U.S. Special Forces for over a decade and did several tours of duty as a Green Beret. He had a wife, he had 2 young children.
Kids.
And I remember reading about him when this happened and just feeling so heartbroken. But there was all this speculation that both of these deaths were directly caused by working long hours under extremely stressful conditions. Yeah. And when we were asked to opine at the time, with just that speculation to go on, we really felt it wasn't our place.
Yeah.
But then earlier this week, the Wall Street Journal came out with an article sharing the story of multiple current and former employees across all different divisions internationally at Bank of America, describing the grueling hours and the frequent overnighters that they were working, the whole time being asked to underreport those hours by their managers. Okay, so remember, all of this actually kicked off more than 10 years ago with the death of another Bank of America intern who died in 2014, I believe. And after that, there were internal memos that circulated and there were all these formal policies put in place. So it was, at some banks, if you work more than 80 hours a week, your MD gets a warning. If you work more than 100 hours a week, you can get flagged to HR and HR intervenes. They were introducing protected weekends or sacred Saturdays. And so all of these company policies were put in place. But what this Wall Street Journal article says is that a bunch of these employees were explicitly asked to violate these policies and keep their true hours off the books. Or that even when HR did intervene, those junior bankers would be on their day off and suddenly get calls on their cell phones being like, you got to come back into the office and you can't report it or work from home or whatever it is. And so, the article gets into the culture behind these long hours and stipulates that, okay, this is all in place because senior bankers view it as a rite of passage. And young bankers are afraid to push back because of the fear of looking weak or losing their jobs. And this is a very, very real problem. It's something that definitely can't be ignored. And it's funny because I worked both in the investment banking division, but for a very short period of time, and mostly in the sales and trading division. And it sounds like the stress and the long hours are kind of division agnostic in a way, because either you get the super high stress, high pressure of the trading floor, or you get the super long hours of the investment banking division. When I was on the trading floor, and I was in sales, by the way, like I wasn't even in a P&L generating role. I had to wear a heart monitor. I had to do one of those 24-hour heart monitor tests because I was having heart palpitations. Like, granted, that was around the Lehman bankruptcy. So that was more just like, my life is falling apart. Like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
But like, you know, this is the level of stress is very, very real. Also, like, I may just have a heart condition. Who knows? But these, it kind of doesn't matter at the end of the day, because there are, I think, very real structural problems in place, especially at the investment banking division level, where the whole rite of passage of long hours thing is such bullshit, to be honest, in so many cases. Because yes, there will be deals, and yes, there will be like, oh my God, listen, if we don't do this by 7 a.m, like we actually may lose out on this huge fee pile. I get that, okay? That happens very infrequently relative to the day in, day out, okay, well, you need to put in this face time and sit around and look busy waiting for something to do when you aren't actually adding measurable value. And that's what I take huge issue with. When I was in investment banking in 2006, it was, you need to stay here until midnight because we are waiting for comments on a PowerPoint presentation from a managing director who's at his Hamptons house. And he doesn't like to do things digitally. So he's going to write out the comments on the printout. And his fax machine isn't working. So he needs to then courier them back into the city. So you need to wait 4 hours for this to turn around. Okay. We do not live in that. First of all, that was ridiculous in that day and age. It is so far beyond the point of absurdity now when everything is digital and everything is instant. There's no reason that you need to be working at 3 a.m. I'm sorry, unless you're in the middle of a deal that's like about to go live the next morning.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is that there's offices like all over the world. So, I mean, it used to be, and I don't know why, like this still isn't the case, that like you have analysts that are here in the US and then in London and then in India and then in Hong Kong. Like you have different time zones. Like, I mean, I don't know.
This happens in trading all the time. You pass it off to Tokyo. Like that's what we're there for. Kristen, I'm totally with you. And I will say this too, okay? It's the burden is on our age group, right? The millennials who are now the MDs. Chris and I are sitting here. We're outside the industry, but you know, our peers generationally are the ones who are the managing directors now at these firms. Yeah. And there's no reason to perpetuate this like hazing ritual. I will say on the flip side, okay, and this has nothing to do with the young men who died. This is just something that we have observed, okay? The flip side of this is that we have observed, and we've had a number of conversations now with thought leaders in the industry. We just had this conversation that we posted about on our social media. We asked one of the managing directors at an investment bank, like, what do you think about the attitude from young people coming up through the industry? And you hear all the time this kind of like, oh, everyone thinks that the next generation coming up sucks. They think that they can do it better, but you couldn't at the time. But consistently, the feedback that we're getting about the young people coming up, they're great on technical skills. They really know their stuff. They can ace all that. What they are really struggling with is attitude and communication. And so when we talk about attitude, we've observed this too in our communications with young people. Everyone's so eager and wants something. And then the second they're in, it's like they ghost you.
Or it's like on to the next thing.
Hey, I really, really want a conversation with you. Please, 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 please. Okay, yeah, cool. Can you do it at 10 a.m. tomorrow? No. No, you can't just say no. That's not how this works, okay? If that were me, I'd be like, okay, I literally am getting an open heart surgery tomorrow at 10 a.m. and I can't do it then, but I can do it at 11, noon, 3, and basically make any other time available to you conceivably possible. Like, I'm so sorry that I can't make that work. And please, I'm so grateful. If you want those opportunities, you have to be willing to show that hustle and show that grit. And for so many people, when they don't know how else to push back, they push back on everything. There is very legitimate pushback on those insane hours where you are not contributing to the bottom line. I'm sorry, there is. It's just not necessary. And I wish that the current generation were empowered to know the difference between the things that you can truly legitimately push back on where you should be protected And the things that I'm sorry, but you got to suck it up. You got to suck it up and learn the unwritten rules that Kristen and I talk about all the time of putting people in the correct order of seniority in emails. Or, hey, listen, FaceTime matters in some scenarios, and being able to know the difference and read the cues of when FaceTime is important, when you shouldn't be with your head down in your phone and your eyes glazed over, right? So sorry for the rant, but.
No, but I think that look, you are going to be working more hours than a 9 to 5, but at the same time, there's no reason for you to be working 100-hour weeks. There's no reason for you to be pulling an all-nighter. Like, that is ludicrous. I saw someone who was like, I was a Bank of America FIG analyst and the places that I slept on. And it was like listing all these places. And it's like, that is unacceptable. I can say I worked in investment banking, and the group that I was in, like, I never pulled an all-nighter. I mean, and I was in a group and it was busy. It was like 2010 financial sponsors, LBOs were picking up, but like there was a culture in the group that was not, I mean, again, you would work long hours. There were days that I, stayed till like 2 a.m., but I always got sleep. I always went home. I never pulled an all-nighter. And like, I don't know. Like I in my head, there is no reason to pull an all-nighter unless the one time I did, I was in college, and it was because I randomly had to go to freaking New York City for a Lehman interview. I came back and my neuroscience professor, because I missed the test, was like, can you take it tomorrow? And I was like, okay, shit, all-nighter it is. But like,
and I've pulled many all-nighters. I pulled an all-nighter for our business recently on an overnight plane flight. And you know what? Like, I was so ill the next day. I used to pull all-nighters in college because I'm a procrastinator and I do my best work under pressure. But that was 100% my fault. There was no one else's fault. There was no need for that to happen.
There shouldn't be a culture of like you pull an all-nighter. I mean, there is no reason for that. No. I do think that working hard and the expectation that you are going to go into some of these jobs, part of the reason you're going to learn as much as you do is because you are going to be working a lot, but there is no reason for it to be that much. And I think that, I mean, that is so ridiculous. And the other thing that, and we talked about this yesterday, actually, that I think is kind of shooting people in the foot, like they're shooting themselves in the foot, but not really them. It's really like the private equity firms. The fact that they're giving offers to kids before they start on the desk. What kid is going to be like, I have an offer at Blackstone and I'm about to start my 2-year investment banking. You feel like hot shit. So you're like, well, I don't need to do like, there's no, I mean, you need to be kept honest. I will say, I went to Brown. We could take classes pass fail. I found if I took classes pass fail, I just didn't try that hard, right? Like my second semester after I got my offer to go into Morgan Stanley, I was much more of like nothing matters. Like I'm already set. Like that's just human nature. So the private equity firms are shooting people in the foot. Essentially, they're setting them up to like not learn this stuff and to kind of have a bad attitude because they've already got the offer. And that's human nature. I'm not like picking on anyone and saying you're a bad person for doing this. I'm saying I would do the same thing, but I think it's actually very problematic for that reason as well. Like, no, I don't know.
I totally agree. So I think, I mean, again, the culture building has to happen on both ends of the barbell. It has to happen with senior management who is saying, okay, what is the marginal utility of the 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. work I'm going to get out of this analyst, right?
Yeah.
Even
midnight, like midnight.
Intern.
Like,
totally. There's just, again, versus, all right, you know what? It's midnight. Whatever I'm going to get from you is going to suck anyways,
right,
compared
to
so
tired. And they're going to be a disaster the next day.
And by the way, then there's a mistake and then it's a fire drill to fix the mistake. How about this? How about managing directors take accountability on themselves to get those deliverables to their team early so they can start working on them so you have time so it isn't this fire drill, right?
Yeah.
But also, how about the young people find ways to demonstrate value, over communicate how hard they are hustling, and show people that, guess what? The number of hours worked is not going to be the benchmark against which I am measured, right? You can take that into your own hands. You really can. And everyone's so afraid of, what are you afraid of? Okay, that your bonus is going to get dinged from 25,000 to 0. Like, really?
Yeah.
That's really what we're talking about here, because I think that that's so short-sighted. You know you're not doing this job because you're making outsized money your first year. Anyone who's doing the job for that reason and that reason alone has missed the memo.
Yeah.
You're going to be underpaid for the work you do at the beginning to open more doors for your potential career. So you need to learn as much as you can. You need to endear yourself to people and show that you are really willing to work hard. No one is ever going to remember that you worked until 3:30 in the morning or 3:45. No one's going to ever remember.
And also, just like, I would be very careful when you're choosing your group to be like, does this group have a good culture? And I know that's easier said than done.
But don't ask what the work-life balance is within the group, because I actually think that is we've talked about.
No, but you can find out. Like,
you can find out other ways. I think there's better ways to suss out culture. But
that should be a huge factor in you choosing what groups to go in. That should be the thing that you are looking at.
Yeah. Absolutely. But it's also a loaded question if you ask, what's my work-life balance going to be as a first year? I do think there's a perception, rightly or wrongly, that you are going to be like, oh God, I really want just like a cushier gig, blah, blah, blah. I think there's better ways to ask it. And you can even say, hey, look, I am a hustler and I am going to work so hard for this group, but I'd really like to understand how you guys deal with last minute fire drills around here. Like, how do you come together as a team to solve those challenges? And then you can get specific stories and specific examples. And if they can't come up with something on the spot that paints a picture of how the team comes together, if they're like, well, everybody just survived on Red Bull and coffee and didn't go home and slept on the office chairs, then you know. Okay.
And I also think another thing is, which is so important, and it goes back to what you had said about the communication. Communication is everything. Like, we've worked with interns and we've worked with people who tell us, hey, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to get it done. And then if they're not able to, that's fine. You have to communicate that, you know.
And you need to communicate it early and often.
Yeah. It's all about communication, because also, like, that's how bosses tend to know, okay, I need these resources. This is how they hire for the next year. This is how, so I do think that, again, it goes to communication. And in some cases, like, the groups that have horrible cultures, like, I'm sorry, they should not be rewarded by the MD should be fired. Like, if the culture is bad, if the culture is toxic, like, that needs to change. But also, if you are going into a group, one of the things that you can do to make yourself, again, set apart, and just people really appreciate communication, being very specific about, like, this is what I've done, this is what I need to do, this is how much time this is going to take. You know, if we have a resource, this is, you know, being very, very, very over communicative is essential.
And if an asteroid hits your house at 8 a.m. and you can't deliver something by 8:30, at 8 o'clock and 30 seconds, you need to send that email out. It can't be at 8:29. And that's all the difference, right? You need to be so thoughtful about how you utilize other people's time. That goes for MDs down to analysts and analysts up to MDs. And I think truly, if people can think about that holistically, of what's the best resource, like, what's the best use of my time, and what's the best, and how does that help someone else think about the best use of their time, then you have good team dynamics. Kristen, we do this all the time. It's just the two of in this company, right? People are always like, can I send something to your assistant? Can I send something to your social media manager, right? It's like that. We did that reel once of like, come meet the staff at the Wall Street meeting. It's literally just the two of us. And so
we're putting out the,
And so when I'm like, hey, Kristen, I can't do this. Here's 5 other things I'm going to tackle, but I need you to do this, right?
Yeah.
I'm letting you know what I am doing so that the right hand is talking to the left. And you're like, cool, I can take care of this, that, and the other, but that means that I'm actually going to need you to pick up this other thing. I'm like, done, already done. You know what I'm saying? And it's that simple. And yet it's one of the things that people stumble over the most. Either they're afraid of looking weak, they're afraid of, like, whatever it is, right? Whatever you're afraid of, listen, we can see that the consequences are literally so much higher than death, right? Yeah. So end of speech. I know we have a lot else to cover. But yeah, I really want to get into these deals now that hopefully no analyst is working 100-hour weeks to make happen.
I hope not. Okay, so we wanted to get into this deal. So Mars has agreed to buy Kellanova, the maker of Cheez-Its and Pringles, for $35.9 million in an all-cash deal, which I'm going to explain in a second. But what's crazy about this is, like, this is the largest deal in this space since Mars bought Wrigley in 2008, which I know way too much about because I read this book called The Chocolate Wars, and it goes into like way too much detail on just some of the different industry dynamics.
We should add that to our list, The Chocolate Wars, for Oh no, I've never read it.
It's good. It gets into a lot of detail on the Kraft acquisition of Cadbury and then a number of the other deals that were going on at the time. But the first 90% is basically like the history of growing cocoa in like the 1800s. But it is very interesting, and it gets into some dynamics because the Kraft acquisition of Cadbury was was a hostile deal. Cadbury did not want to sell. And so anyway, there's, like I said, there's just a lot of interesting dynamics. But when Mars bought Wrigley, they paid a very high multiple. It was something like 17 or 18 times EBITDA, when the comps in the industry were closer to like 10 to 12 times, if I remember correctly. So it was a very interesting case study. But now they are buying Kellanova. But the point that I was trying to make is that, like, who the heck is Kellanova? So basically, if you're like me and have never heard of them before, they actually used to be Kellogg. And so what happened at the end of 2023 is they did something called a tax-free spinoff. And what also is lovely and confusing about this whole finance world is that there's a whole bunch of different terms for some of these different, it's called like public market separation techniques. There is a spinoff. There's actually a split off, which is something different. There are equity carve-outs, like there's all these different things. And so with this particular deal, what happened is they basically split the company into two entities. So they have—
Is there a difference between a spinoff and a split off?
There is. Oh, yeah. So
cool.
The difference, let me explain this spin-off and then I'll explain the split off. I literally always have to think, I'm like, wait, which one's which? So with the spin-off, you have shareholders who own this public company and then that they own a subsidiary. What then happens is that you basically split it into two so that the shareholders now own both entities. And so if you are a shareholder in Kellogg, you now get ownership of each of those two now public entities. So when they did this split up, when they did the spinoff, it became WK Kellogg, which traded under their own ticker symbol. And then they had Kellanova, okay? And that was trading under the ticker symbol K. So that is what Mars is now interested in buying, has made the bid for, is the Kellanova. The WK Kellogg is now kind of still off in its little own universe, like doing its own little thing. But basically, so when this happened, if you were a shareholder in Kellogg, you would receive 1 share of WK Kellogg for every 4 shares of the Kellogg company you owned. And again, the rest was this Kellanova. So you basically now own both. What a split off is as a shareholder, you get to decide if you want to basically surrender your shares and get shares in the new entity that's created. So it's a little bit less like there's a decision that someone can make. So you can decide to exchange shares into the subsidiary or not. And so it's less of a sort of almost like cut and dry thing. Here, everyone basically, if you're a shareholder, you're now going to be, you have both, whereas you basically get to elect what you want to do if it was a split off. So
Got it.
Again, it gets very complicated. Like this is all the shit that our friend Jake off at Wachtell Lipton, like this is the type of shit that he's working on, like these types of fun things.
Cool.
So we should actually get him back on to explain this in a better, to explain this better. Cause I am, like I said, I'm kind of an amateur. I understand enough to be dangerous, but I'm not an expert. But the point was, this is where Kellanova came from because I was like, what the heck is this? So Mars is buying Kellanova for, like I said, $36 billion almost in an all cash deal. That means that they are essentially coming up with cash, likely financed through raising debt and giving it to the shareholders of Kellanova. Now, you had made an interesting point, Jen. You had earlier when we were talking about this, you were like, oh, did they do an all cash deal because they had to since they're not a public company? So Mars is private. So you still, if you're a private company, like you still can do a deal and do a deal partly in stock. Like, yes, you don't have acquisition currency that is trading. But I mean, think of it this way, Jen. If you and I decide, like, we find some little tech startup, we can be like, hey, little tech startup, we're going to pay you some amount of money. And then, by the way, you also get some ownership in the Wall Street Skinny. And actually,
got it.
With Facebook, so when Facebook bought Instagram in 2012, they did it. This was before they went public. I think they went public later that year. But still, when they bought Instagram, it was I think 30% cash, 70% stock. I don't remember which was which, but they did it before they went public. So you still can do a deal where it is not, where if you are a private company, you can potentially buy another company and use some kind of stock consideration.
Got it.
But it's maybe less common potentially. So
You're so good at this stuff. Thank you for explaining that to me.
I mean, I would, thank you. So anyway, very interesting deal going on. Obviously, huge merger. And so if you are someone who's like interested in, I don't know, interviewing in the M&A space, like this might be something that you potentially want to have in your back pocket that you can talk about.
If I were an M&A interviewer, I would ask that exact question. I would be like, why did Mars do this as an all cash deal? Right. And just see how they answer and see what they know.
Yeah. I mean, the answer is, it's again, it is hard. Like usually when the company is publicly traded, you can look at those relative PEs and just figure out, but yes. Okay. So the other quick thing we wanted to address is it has been in the news that Google potentially may need to be split up. So on August 5th, a judge found that Google monopolized the search engine market. And so if this does happen, that Google has to be split up, they may not. So there's different remedies that I think the US government is trying to look at. And again, I'm not an expert in the legal field, so I feel like at some point we should get a legal expert to come on and explain what the heck is going on here. But what's interesting is, so we've talked before about Acquired, who I love. They have a great podcast. And they have, I'm basically listening right now to this part 2 of a 3-part series where each part is 4 hours long. And so they basically went into some of the history of what happened with Microsoft, because Microsoft was the last big tech company that was at one point ordered to be split up. So a lot of people don't necessarily know this, but back in, I think it was like 1993, the FTC started to look into Microsoft. And ultimately, like, it was a split decision. Nothing was going to happen. But then the DOJ decides to get involved, which people were like pissed about because they're like, well, one part of the government already decided that this wasn't an issue. Now you have this judge and like the DOJ decides, well, we are going to go after them. And so the problem that they had initially is they had sold like their computers with Internet Explorer. Like, so they were bundling some of the apps that they were selling. And the problem is that by them essentially selling computers that had Internet Explorer already installed, that was anti-competitive to other people who were in the,
other browsers,
internet browser space, I guess. And so a judge had said, you have to stop bundling Internet Explorer. When they did that, it kind of fucked up their code for other stuff. So like, it didn't really work out that well. And then the DOJ decided to go after them even harder and basically went after them and tried to prove or show that they were a monopoly, which is legal. You can be a monopoly. What you can't do is basically abuse monopoly power. And they found A, they were a monopoly, and B, they were abusing that monopoly power. And so they were required basically at that point to split the company into 2. And so Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer had to like go to like each of the 2 separate entities. It caused like a 55% drop in the share price over the next year. And it really distracted them. Like, I mean, this is one of the things that kind of led to almost like the downfall of Microsoft. Like, people may not remember this, but between like 2000 and I don't know, gosh, like 2015, sort of Microsoft was seen as almost like this declining, like just, it was almost like a joke. It's like, who's going to use the Zune phone or whatever that weird phone was that they had? And obviously now they are back as like one of the most valuable companies in the world. But what it did is it did kind of, it totally effed them over a little bit, because ultimately they did appeal. The judge who ruled they had to basically split themselves up was found to like have been doing some illegal stuff where they were talking to the press in chambers, which was wildly illegal. So they ultimately got rid of that judge, put in a new judge, and ultimately they did reach a settlement, and Microsoft was not split up. So that's the TLDR here. Like, the US government did rule that Microsoft was a monopoly and had to be split up, but it did not ultimately happen. So if this happens for Google, like, again, that would be kind of a first. But what the lessons I feel like to learn is that it was a really tumultuous time at Microsoft. It took a number on them in terms of cultural, just like the feeling there, the sentiment there. And so it actually, it was a huge cost for them, like emotionally, culturally, everything. That was around the time when, again, Bill Gates decided to step down. And I think he became like, I don't know, the chief product officer or something. But anyway, TLDR with Google, if they do ultimately push for this, it would be a huge, wild thing. And so it is something that we're going to be keeping our eyes out on. So with that, was there anything else, Jen, we wanted to touch on?
No, I just want to highlight that, again, our newsletter has launched. This is a free newsletter where we're going to be going in depth and providing you content that you are literally not going to get anywhere else. This isn't just like recaps of our podcast episodes. We will be giving you interview questions that not only you might be asked, but that you can ask your interviewers to sound thoughtful. We'll be doing technical, in-depth deep dives on either stuff that's going on the market or deals like this beyond the scope of what's in the podcast or on our social media. And we get asked questions by you guys every single week in our Ask Me Anything series that we do on social media. Some of those questions require really in-depth responses that we're just like, yes, no, here's 5 bullet points. So things like, what do I do about my low GPA? Or what do people actually get paid in various roles on Wall Street? Or what should I wear for my interview? Whether any one of those things, from lifestyle to technical to like in-depth on the job questions, we're going to be tackling all that stuff there. So you should sign up.
Yeah, and the newsletter we put out yesterday was on, and Jen is again just like our pun queen. So it was major volatility. It was on the VIX and volatility. It was on what major should I do for a job on Wall Street coming up tomorrow. Am I allowed to like give people the teaser as to what the topics are? So it is grade inflation. So it's going to be on grades and inflation, CPI numbers, kind of how to interpret.
I know I said the CPI number was a nothing burger, but
no, but I mean, it's not, that's the thing. Like Jen basically is not just getting into like, this isn't just a newsy thing. It's a, hey, like, let's talk about how to understand what is happening. By the way, here's some resources that we have that you can like, if you're interested in this, go deeper on. And by the way, people always ask us, do my grades matter? And the answer is, well, yes and no. And so Jen has a very thoughtful response that gets into much more detail than what we were able to do in a simple Q&A. So Jen put a lot of work into this. It's awesome.
And it's free. There's no reason like, it's free, guys. If I could have had this content for free when I was either interviewing for my job or when I was on my job and looking to understand things better and literally Googling like, what's the difference between core CPI and headline and blah, blah, blah. To have these kind of resources, just breaking it out simply is something I really wish I'd had. So that's what we're trying to create here.
And so just to give you guys a sense of what we have coming up this week. So I think this weekend we're going to be doing a deep dive into resumes. So it's going to be a Jen and I episode, which is going to be
exciting. We haven't had one of those in a while.
No, I know.
Kristen and Jen's Saturday episode.
Which is rare. And then after that, we have just some ridiculous guests. We talked to Ted Seides earlier today, who he actually is the one who had his famous bet with Warren Buffett on would a group of hedge funds outbeat the S&P. It was a 10-year bet. So we asked him about that. But anyway, it's a really fascinating conversation. We have a lot of other really awesome guests. So definitely, if you are not subscribed, hit subscribe. If you can, go to the podcast app of your choice and leave us a 5-star review. It really helps. And thank you guys so much. And we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.